Welcome to the Suncoast In-Depth podcast. My name is Brett Watson, and I'm joined here today by my longtime good friend, Kevin Ohara. And we're going to talk about Chapter 16, The Universal Christ, titled Transformation and Contemplation. So thanks for doing this with me.
Yeah.
Those who come on what used to be Thursday nights, now Sunday mornings, know you well.
Yeah.
Because you've done that with me for a long time. But a lot of the people that watch this don't come.
Right.
And so this is kind of cool that we can introduce you.
Yeah.
So thanks for doing this. And I was going to start this off with a couple of what I see as key points in this chapter, transformation and contemplation. And the first is that contemplation is the change that changes everything, he says.
Yeah.
And then at the very end of the chapter, he sums up the chapter with, I think, another cool key statement. If this pattern, referring to life, death, resurrection, if this pattern is true, it has been true all the time and everywhere. Such scene did not just start 2,000 years ago. All of us travelers, each in our own way, have to eventually learn about letting go of something smaller so something bigger can happen. But that's not a religion. It's highly visible truth. It is the way reality works. Yes, I am saying that the way things work and Christ are one and the same. This is not a religion to either be fervently joined or angrily rejected. It is a train ride already in motion. The tracks are visible everywhere. You can be a willing and happy traveler or not.
Right. Yeah.
So that's to kick it off.
Yeah.
Give me your thoughts as you went through this chapter.
Well, I think that final statement there, still today, a great deal of 21st century evangelical Christianity would see that as a heretical statement.
Why?
Well, because Christianity is a religion to be joined. It is a set of beliefs and propositions that you must accept. And if you don't accept those propositions, you're facing eternal hell. And, if you do, well, now you're facing eternal bliss.
Yeah. I had to go pick up a car that somebody donated to the church to give away. And so I rode with one of the maintenance guys here, Riley.
Right.
And it was cool because I didn't know Riley. He's been here for a while now.
Right.
And he's very quiet, clearly introverted. I like even more than we are probably.
Yeah.
And I could feel his sense of relief when I got in the car and I said, I'm an introvert, probably to a fault. Good with that? And he goes, yes. But anyway, we got into a cool conversation
Right.
About just religion. He didn't know the history of Suncoast and the document and all that stuff.
Yeah, right.
And the mass exodus that it created, right?
Yeah.
Where most of the evangelicals that you're referencing left Suncoast.
Yeah.
Because they learned things about the beliefs of, the educated, the scholars on staff here believed. And so they just left.
Yeah.
And you're right that these notions of a set of beliefs, propositions, making you right or not right with God, depending on your acceptance of those beliefs or your rejection, just seems to be nowhere in the New Testament.
Yeah.
You could say that it's a little more present in the Old Testament just because of the law, as the law is presented, and the need to accept the law.
Yeah.
But in the New Testament, you never see Jesus listing out things to check off, beliefs to check off, creeds to hold to.
Yeah.
And instead, you see what Rohr refers to as a love focus on it. Not that he never confronted
Yeah.
He did confront
definitely
many
did
times
that,
in somewhat caustic ways
Right.
the religious elite of his day. But I would argue that that's because his message was love-focused and not information-focused.
Yeah, I think, I'm always a little troubled when I hear people who I would say kind of fall on the mystical side of things, like Rohr.
Like me.
And you, yeah. But in some ways myself, too. But whenever we start saying, well, beliefs don't matter, because it's not that beliefs don't matter, it's just that they're more nuanced and more subtle and more conditional on other things, so it's not simple, always or never statements that one size fits all. And so what you find is that a lot of modern Christianity, the beliefs that they say are important, and I think this is how you can tell, because clearly there are truths that are more important than other truths, especially as to how it pertains to my life. I used to box, and so I know a little bit about the sport. In my opinion, Mike Tyson was probably the greatest heavyweight champion that ever lived. Now, I might be wrong about that. I think it's probably true, but if it is true or if it's not true, if I'm right or if I'm wrong, it has really no impact at all in my life.
Yes.
None. Okay. And so, whereas other things do have an impact on my life, other beliefs do. And what I notice about modern day evangelical Christianity is the set of propositions that they find so important that you believe are propositions that in the end have no impact on your life.
They're not transformational.
They're not transformational at all.
Right.
So, if I have to believe in the Trinity, that, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, co-equal, co-eternal, and if I don't believe that, I'm in some sort of heresy.
Yeah.
I have to believe in baptism. I have to believe Jesus was born of a virgin. He was the incarnation of God, that he died on the cross for my sins and rose the third day. And I have to accept all of those beliefs. And if I don't accept those beliefs, historical facts, somehow then God can't do his work in me.
Yeah.
And if I do accept him, now suddenly he can.
Yeah.
But the reality is that none of those things that I just laid out, whether you believed them or not, I mean, they're mostly just, the resurrection and the crucifixion, all that, those are historical events. But then Jesus being God and, all that. I mean, you can see where some of it, if you say, well, I don't believe Jesus was God, well, then, you doubt his teachings and so forth. But, someone could easily say, well, I believe in all those teachings. I think that he was right on the money, but I don't think he was God, And
I
it would
believe
have
that I should strive to live by them.
Then that would have really the same impact. Just the conviction that, he's God, and my experience hasn't made anyone strive all that much harder.
Well, just flip the coin over and let's look at the evidence of transformation in most Christian lives.
That's right. It's
most Christians
non-existent
in
my
popular
experience.
Christianity have a set of beliefs that they hold to with great zeal.
Right.
And yet there's very little transformation that seems to take place in their lives.
Well, I mean, if you just look at the big things in our society, things like, let's say, divorce rates, that clearly, according to any modern-day evangelical Christian, is something that God's very interested in and that we have beliefs about, and they get divorced at about the same rate as the secular population.
This gets back to the conversation I was having with Riley on the way up to get this car. He's like, well, if, he identified right away. You could tell he's thought about these things. If all of that is true, all the things that I learned, as a kid, or that his overzealous friend's mother spouts off all the time, then why don't I see a real difference in their life compared to my life?
Right.
My desire to do what is good and right and so on versus them.
That's right. And so it really does, and they'll even say, well, then this is why you're saved by grace. In the end, it doesn't matter what you do if you accept these beliefs, you're still saved. And that's, I would say, pretty much, most evangelical Christianity today leans toward that Calvinistic view. Mm-hmm. They all you're saved by grace, and and so yeah, kind of doesn't matter what you do. My friend Jay, he flat out told me in a conversation we had here, a few weeks ago, because, he knows the way I'm living my life right now. He says, Kevin, I truly believe that, no matter what you do, you are saved. You're just a child of the King, period. It's not going to matter what you do.
So it's a good thing you have friends like me to tell you that
that I'm not.
You're
probably
hell
for hell.
No. Yeah.
And I think that, it's almost a necessary ingredient when your whole belief system is all predicated on things that don't really require any change except for you just to verbally say that you believe them.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, what Richard talks about, and he even talks about the trivial things versus the important things.
Yeah.
The really important things of life are much subtler, and when you ask questions about how do you love, the way Christ loved, let's say, how do you actually play that out in your life? What does it mean to do that? And and all of those kinds of things. So, so beliefs matter. It's not that, believing that in general, loving your enemy is the right way for not only you to go, but for the world to try and embrace. Believing that means impact. It means, okay, well, this is a belief that affects how I have to live my life. And Richard seems to feel that through contemplation, he's discovered that, look, this Christian faith of ours is really more about true transformation and not about a set of beliefs so it's not about a set of beliefs that don't require any transformation. It's about a set of beliefs that the act of believing it itself would require a transformation. You know?
So it's not that beliefs are unimportant,
right?
Like you said earlier. It's just that some are far more important,
right,
with respect to your transformation into a better and better and better version of yourself than others.
Right. That's right.
The focus clearly from the Gospels for Jesus was, well, what's going on with your intentions? What's going on in what we would call your heart and your mind? And how do you take care of those things that you can identify yourself as problematic?
Right.
And then he also comes forward with some much more, I guess what you would call counterintuitive things, like things loving your enemies. I listened to some Kabbalist thinkers, Jewish mystics, and they still quote, love your friends and hate your enemies.
Yeah.
They still quote that.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
And so it makes sense, and then that goes way back.
Right.
Definitely to Jesus' day. And so it makes sense that Jesus counters that with love your enemies.
Right.
Pray for those who persecute you. And that requires, like you said, change.
Yeah.
Change from the inside out.
Right.
But
and ironically, though, it's like, okay, I guess you could make the argument that if you believe that Jesus was God incarnate, that by default, then you would have to think that everything he taught was absolutely true. And so if he tells you to do something, well, you would do it.
Yeah.
But the weird thing is believing that he died on the cross to wash away your sins
negates the necessity to
right.
believe
That's
that
right.
I should
It
love my
negates,
enemies.
that's exactly right. Because if you don't do that, you still get to go to heaven.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the belief that is emphasized, the belief that requires nothing except for you to say you believe it.
Yeah.
Okay?
It's a very human thing to do.
Right. But these other beliefs then, well, yeah, you should do those things, but that's not what gets you into heaven. Loving your enemy, that's works related. That doesn't get you into heaven,
Right. It's almost turned into an enemy itself.
Yes.
Yeah. Because those are works.
Yeah. Right. That's right.
And
especially if you think loving your enemy will get you into heaven. If you think that'll do it, you're way off base now.
You are a heretic.
In fact, that belief
destined
itself
for hell.
is going to send you to hell. That's right. If you believe that you have to do the things that Jesus said to do in order to get into heaven, then you're a heretic, because that means you don't believe that his death on the cross was sufficient.
I know.
Yeah, that's where we are with evangelical Christianity.
Unfortunately, that's where we are.
So it's a really, really good idea to do what Jesus says, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
And you better not believe that those other things will be what will get you into heaven.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all kinds of absurd.
Yeah.
It just is.
Right.
I'm
right.
just going to call it for what it is. Not only that, but historically speaking, if you were to present that kind of logic to someone like Paul,
well,
he would say,
right.
"What the hell is wrong with you?"
Like, right. Which he
have you read anything that I wrote down?
Right. Which he clearly lays out. I mean, if you just read the 6th chapter of Galatians, right? He says, "Look, don't be fooled. Whatever you sow, that too shall you reap." And he says, "Don't be fooled. No." This, that, or the other thing, none of these people, these evil things, none of these people shall enter into the kingdom of heaven. He just laid that out very clearly. So, the sense I got, the sense I get from Paul's letters are more along the lines. I think what he was really addressing with like works and everything. Well, it's funny now that I think about it. I've never really thought of this before, but when you think about it, the Jews did with behavior what we Christians, these modern day Christians, do with belief. So the behaviors that you had to perform made no difference one way or the other in your actual life. So being circumcised,
especially the ritual,
that's the one, and that seems to be what Paul attacked.
Yes.
Whether or not you're circumcised, he said circumcision is nothing. One way, that was a ritual thing that you did to set yourself apart, but that's not what's important. Right. All of the things in the sacrificial system, that's not really what's important. Those were designed to show you something, but at the end of the day, a changed heart is what's important. And I think that what Paul mostly was talking about was he was saying, don't do with your behavior what modern Christians are doing now with their beliefs.
Yes.
Don't put yourself into a situation where you're just doing these behaviors that you think somehow make you right with God. It's idiotic.
Of course.
But the thing is
so
Paul
we're
would
not
have never
advocating
said
for works righteousness.
That's right.
Okay.
He just would have never said, but it's okay, to be a pervert, or it's okay to steal from your neighbor. Don't worry, as long as you love God, those things, he did seem to be saying that, yes, we're all sinners, and, if you really believe in the way I'm suggesting, you're going to do everything in your power to fight against that, and that the Holy Spirit will help you in that. But he never seems to suggest that that you can live any way you want to live at all. He never seems to suggest that. He does seem to suggest that, there's a lot of beliefs that are deeper in the sense that I'm talking about here, that, yes, you absolutely need to accept this as a belief in the way you live your life and what it means to be transformed and transform others. Yes, you absolutely need to believe this. If you don't believe this, you're not really a Christian.
Yeah.
That's what he seems to be saying in so many of his letters. So
yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it, the way that we continually, as human beings, turn really good wisdom into a very convenient belief set, into nonsensical, really. Just highly convenient but nonsensical belief systems.
Yeah.
When I brought up the issue of hell in my car ride with Riley, and I told him the history there of how that developed and so on, he goes, "What? That is crazy." And I said, "Right." I said, "You didn't know that, did you? How many Christians do you think know that?" He said, "Nobody knows that."
Yeah, right.
I said, "I would not recommend you take my word for it, but just go look up the history yourself."
Yeah.
I know that's what you're going to find. But
right.
The early church didn't teach that idea that God made you, you better get it right in the first 70 years.
Yeah.
Because when you die, you go to judgment.
It's either
eternal hell or eternal bliss.
Yeah.
It just wasn't something the early church taught.
Yeah, the term he uses several times here is more nuanced and more complex. And that is, I would say that's the case. So the really important things in life do tend to be more nuanced and more complex. It's rare
Yes.
that you can have just some simple rule that applies to everything with, one size fits all. That's
Right.
just not, that's a rarity,
Right.
you know?
And so then let's just talk a minute about the role of contemplation. So we're establishing that the goal is transformation.
Sure. Yeah.
So you live in this reality, and you are to develop within that reality with some level of freedom. We don't know what that is exactly, but we're subjected to this reality and all of its pressures and its trials and tribulations and joys and pleasures and so on, all the differentials that are involved between those things. But the goal is to develop into this more and more aware, enlightened, whatever word you want to use. He even likens salvation to transformation. He doesn't
Right.
call salvation something where I get to go to heaven. He's saying salvation is meant to be something that is, akin to transformation.
Right.
You are, so in other words, you're being saved from what you are now in order to become something more.
Yeah.
And the process that takes place there is a type of death.
Right.
So you die to what you were so that
Right.
you can become more.
Right.
And then you die to what you were then. And
Yeah.
then
It's a gradual
more-
process. Right.
and the apostles, admittedly, I mean, they speak of salvation as a process. They don't even, the words don't indicate just a one-time
No, that's
decision
right.
or a cognitive act
Yeah.
at all. So he says that, as the title suggests, that contemplation is necessary for this. And by contemplation, how do you interpret what he means by that?
Yeah. Well, that's,
Did you have a science background?
Yeah, right. I think, what he means by contemplation is taking the time to be in deep thought about the realities of life, what the scriptures say, and to consider all of their possible meanings.
Which would be tradition.
Yeah, right. Look at the tradition. And he even says, in here that his institute, the tricycle that they ride is the three wheels are experience, tradition, and scripture, where experience is the front wheel, actually. And in doing so, with a humble spirit, that things will dawn on you. So if you're willing to put down your guard and you're willing to contemplate any possibility, and really think about, well, what does my own experience tell me? What does tradition tell me? Which is presumably, I think what he means by tradition is the sort of common experience of those who have gone before us and who have all agreed on common experiences. And so, okay, this is probably true of humanity and how we are.
And
then your
typically they're referring to the scholarly thinkers.
Yes, right. Yeah.
The fathers of the church, as
Right.
they're called. But
and then the scriptures and what the apostles had to say and everything like that. And so I think that contemplation, it winds up being a way of considering all of reality, including those realities that are not easily shareable and not easily quantifiable. And I think that's why there's a number of places in here where he suggests that rationalism is not enough, right? Yeah. And that it can take you down the wrong path. And
as most people think of rationalism.
Right. Now, yeah, and as I've told you, I think he's dead wrong about that because he's not understanding rationalism the way a good, well-trained scientist would think of it.
Or he's presenting it the way most people think of rationalism.
Right. The sense I get is he thinks of it that way too, because he makes statements like about the tricycles. He says, and we don't.
And we do our best to
we do our best to take all of these things in a rational way, but without giving rationalism a wheel of its own, because if we did that, it would end up driving the whole cart. And I think he's just wrong about that, because rationalism, by its very nature, couldn't do that. Because what it does is it always gives you right answers. It never gives you wrong answers. And when it can't give you an answer, it tells you that.
Yes.
So that's good. But
the vast majority of people,
I would say a lot of people don't understand it that way.
rationalism.
No, that's true. And they do. And so I think, though, that what happens for most people, I mean, the level above rationalism, which in my view is what in mathematics is called first-order logic, and that's how scientists see it. But then the level above that is critical thinking. And so, logic needs premises to be plugged in to do the argument, right? Well, where do you get the premises? Well, those are the observations of life. Those are the observations. And so in science, those premises can only come from empirical observations that you and I can share. We can all agree this is what we see, right? But then there's just a lot of observations. There are a lot of things in life that just aren't easily shareable like that. Like, my grandmother loved me. I mean, how can I share that reality with you? How can I can't.
Yeah, great example. Yeah.
For blind people, the color, how do you share what color is with them? How do you even, and so there are just things that are not empirical in the sense that everybody can just observe it the same or whatever, and also not easily quantifiable, which is so much of the physical sort of world around us. And I think that's what he means. And so I do believe he falls into an error there in thinking that what rationality is sort of the scientific way of thinking. Yeah. And he tends to think of it as it's either or. And that's not really science either, but...
Which is oddly dualistic of him.
Exactly. And in fact, when he talks about ascending religion or descending religion, and I tend to only trust descending religion, I actually put in my notes, gosh, that's pretty dualistic of you, don't you think? So, yeah. And I mean, of course, he does that too, because sometimes there are choices. And I think he would defend that by saying, well, it's not that there's not ever a dual choice, but often there's not. Yeah. But rationality wouldn't say that there's not either or thinking. There's also and thinking, Yeah. And so I think he thinks of contemplation as a way of gaining, observations. He might call them insights about realities that people don't otherwise really, so they don't really engage. A lot of people who claim they're thinking rationally are just operating with a very simple set of premises. Yeah. And I think that's what he sees.
When you're more intentional in the way of contemplation, then you don't end up with hyper simple premises.
You have lots of premises that are very complex. Right. And so, and I think that what he sees is a history of people who have tried to apply rationality, and in many cases were just flat wrong, just made mistakes, even in their arguments. But then in addition to that, had very limited premises, and then were convinced that that's all there was somehow. And for Father Rohr, what's his first name?
Richard.
Richard, sorry. I can't believe I blanked out on his name. For Richard, I think he sees, look, when you engage in contemplation, you begin to realize that there's a big set of premises there, and that offer lots more possibilities than what you have come up with. And he's right about that. Yeah. I mean, he is. He's completely right about that.
And when I take the time to be more intentional about my awareness, that's really what contemplation is, right? You're being more intentional about your observation of reality.
Right.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a certain lotus, position.
Yes, like
to
he
do
says.
That, right. It just takes intentionality.
Right.
And when I do that, I'm way more likely to be transformed by those thoughts, and my actions are much more likely to change because of those thoughts. One of the analogies that he gave is when I view reality with the larger screen of contemplation, then I tend to make my observations from a much more kind point of view, much more open and kind. Right. There's a reason why mystics are described as very chill and not easily angered and so on. And it's just because they're taking things in on a much bigger scale.
Right, a much wider screen,
than a lot of people do. And so a much wider screen.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And so it's just good practice. It just is for any human being. And it doesn't take years and years of scholarly training in religion or philosophy or anything like that. But and even in the sciences that are telling us so much, but just being more intentional. Because the average person doesn't have time to pore over this stuff.
Yeah,
like
right.
Or the interest for that matter.
Yeah.
Like maybe you or I do.
Yeah,
but
being more intentional about their own experience
and self.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And he says that throughout history we've never just really admitted to ourselves that mostly what we do is go by our own experience anyway.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what we do,
That's right.
And if you're just more intentional about, well, what really is my experience?
Right.
And thinking
why do
about
I think
that,
I know?
Right.
Is there a way to know what I think I know?
Right. And see, here's the thing. What I would say to Richard, and I'd love to have a conversation with him about this, because any time you contemplate, and if what he means by that is observe your life, but then think about what that implies, you are automatically taking those premises of your own observations from contemplation and plugging them into some sort of rational machinery.
Yes, of course.
That leads you to believe something, okay? As a result of this experience, what I've observed in my life, I have come to believe this. Why? Because I've put those together and they seem to imply this, and this, and I've come to some sort of conclusion that I believe in. So it's, everything that we believe is ultimately the result of some kind of observation plugged into some kind of rational machinery. Because the only question is whether your rational machinery is correct.
Right.
Is whether it's sound, rational. The rules of your rationality are in fact sound and don't lead to contradictions.
And admittedly, the more you understand that machinery, like formal logic, the better you're going to be.
The much better you're going to be
in your observations.
Right.
But like I said, most people don't have the interest or the time to really get into that.
Well, and it's like, look, a lot of the errors in logic, and I do think it's likely that even if you're very contemplative, if you have a misunderstanding, that you will make errors in logic. But a lot of the errors of logic, the reason why people make them is because it's not an absolute guarantee of something, but it is a likely. So, the rule that says if A, then B, if A implies B, that does not necessarily mean that B implies A. But a good percentage of the time it does.
Yeah.
And so when people make that mistake, they're making a mistake that is formally speaking, it is a mistake. But when they apply that mistake to lots of situations, most of the time it ends up leading to a true conclusion, even though they've made a technical mistake in their logic. So, when it rains, the ground gets wet. But technically, a water main could bust and make the ground wet over a big portion of some piece of land. And so if you're driving by and you see all this wet ground somewhere and you say, oh, it must have rained, you're technically making a mistake logically, but it probably rained.
Yeah, it's still going to work for you.
Yeah, that's right. So you probably are still going to gather true conclusion. And I think that's probably, I would say that, I think that by being contemplative and just taking the intentionality to think, that you are probably going to often just come to good conclusions that you just otherwise would not have come to.
Yeah, because you would be completely unaware.
Right.
You're
unaware, and if you don't
automaton mode.
That's right. And if you don't approach it with like the humility that he's talking about, so you approach your experiences with a certain humility that says, okay, here are my experiences in life, but what does that really tell me? What can I gather from that seems, okay, yeah, this would have to be true. But maybe not this. Maybe I've just assumed this for some ridiculous reason.
The humility piece is really important, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's no wonder that you see so much talk of that, especially among the the apostles and
Yeah,
Jesus too. But,
right.
the apostles really drive that home.
And by the way, you know who the most humble people you'll ever meet is if you in the right context?
What?
Scientists.
Well, yes.
Scientists are unbelievably humble.
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as you ask them about something that has any complexity at all, they'll start saying, well, there's probably a lot of people that know a lot more about this than I do.
Yes.
But, you know, because...
And if you don't believe that, just go on YouTube
That's right.
and listen to them.
Yeah,
it's
they're
true.
very, and that's because they've realized how complex the world is
Right.
and how easy it is to be wrong, and so they're very cautious about making.
Yeah, because
bold,
whether they call it this or not, they've been involved through their profession in contemplative living.
In a lot of ways, that's
through the
right.
scientific method.
Yes, they're contemplating. Okay, what could be true here? You know,
Yeah.
That's right, and it's made them humble in that area. Now, you know, I think that what a lot of people have the opposite perception of scientists, that they're arrogant and they think they know everything, but that's because, and you kind of hear this a little bit like from Richard, like clearly Richard is annoyed with fundamentalism type Christianity in many places, and he comes across as annoyed as Jesus came across annoyed with people like in that vein. And the annoyance comes from, look, okay, there's a lot to learn, and we want to keep making progress. And so we have learned this, okay? And when you keep saying that this isn't true and believing things that we know can't be true, that's holding us back from making this progress that's so much grander and so much better. Yeah. And I think that Richard would feel that same annoyance, like with fundamentalist, let's say, Christians. He feels that same kind of annoyance with them as scientists feel with a lot of lay people, you know, who believe all sorts of things, from the earth being flat to there's no such thing as climate change, all those things, you know. And so that's why they get irritated, and then they come across as arrogant because they feel irritated, you know.
And it's easy for me if I can pin arrogance on them. It's easy for me to ignore them.
Sure.
You know,
absolutely.
And therefore the truths that they bring forward.
And see, there's an example of a logical fallacy. Their arrogance doesn't make them wrong.
Yeah, even if they are arrogant,
right? That doesn't have anything to do.
Wrong, right?
You know, and that's something to remember about truth. You know, truth is independent of what anybody says or does or thinks. So any utterance from anybody, its truth value is completely independent of them. Yeah. It doesn't matter who or what they are. Yeah. You know, what they said, whether it's true or not, is true on its own merits.
You'd never know that listening to Republicans talk about Democrats.
And vice versa. That's right.
Talking about Republicans.
Yeah, that's right.
It's always about some kind of character issue that they've spotted.
Yes.
Therefore, we can't believe anything that they say,
right.
You know?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the long and short of this is, if you want to be someone who is progressing, then there is a need to be more aware.
More contemplative. I think that's a great word. Yeah.
About reality. And at least, you know, in his, according to Richard's definitions, and I think a lot of scholarly Christian thinking, that's equated with God, or in his book, Christ.
Right.
Reality, Christ.
Right.
So be contemplative. That's the lesson in this talk.
Yes, indeed.
So thanks again.
Yeah.
It's been a good talk. Yeah.